I kept the paper in my wallet for 11 days before I threw it away. Not because I needed it, because every time I felt it there, stiff against my fingers, I remembered exactly who my son had become, and I needed to remember. I needed that anger to stay clean and cold, the way good anger should be, so I wouldn't second-guess what I had already decided to do. Let me back up. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 41 years as a structural engineer. I designed bridges, I designed hospital wings and municipal water towers, and, once, a pedestrian overpass in Portland that I still drive out of my way to see when I'm passing through. I built things that were meant to hold weight. I understood load-bearing. I understood what happens when something is asked to carry more than it was designed for. I thought I understood my son. His name is Ethan. He is 34 years old. He has his mother's cheekbones and my stubbornness, and for most of his life I considered that combination a gift. He was sharp. He was driven. When he graduated from business school, I cried in the parking lot of the hotel where his reception was held, standing beside my car with my jacket off, crying in a way I hadn't done since my own father's funeral. I wasn't embarrassed. I had earned that moment. His mother and I both had. His mother passed when Ethan was 26. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to gone. I won't say more about that because this story isn't about her. But you need to understand that after she died, it was just the two of us. And I made a decision, the way a father makes decisions, quietly and without announcement, that I would make sure Ethan was taken care of. That I would not let what we had built together dissolve into probate courts and arguments. I hired an attorney. I updated my will. I restructured the ownership of my properties so that in the event of my death, Ethan would receive everything cleanly, without delay, without complication. 3 properties. The house I lived in, a 4-bedroom colonial on 2 acres in Connecticut that his mother and I had bought in 1991. A rental duplex in New Haven that had been generating income for 15 years. And a cabin in Vermont that we'd used for family vacations, that Ethan had learned to fish at, that had his height measurements penciled on the doorframe in the kitchen, going back to when he was 4 years old. I told him about all of it. I sat down with him at my kitchen table 2 years after his mother died and I walked him through every document. He knew exactly what he was inheriting. He knew the attorneys involved, the account numbers, the insurance policies. I wanted transparency. I wanted him to feel secure. I want you to understand that because what came next is easier to make sense of if you know that I had given him everything willingly. I wasn't holding anything over him. There was no power being wielded. I was just a father trying to take care of his son. What I didn't account for was his wife. Her name is Courtney. She came into Ethan's life about 3 years after his mother passed. And in the beginning, I had no real objection to her. She was well presented. She laughed at the right moments. She said the right things at Christmas dinner and asked polite questions about my work and seemed, from the outside, like someone who wanted to be part of the family. The first time I noticed something was a Sunday afternoon about 18 months into their relationship. I had called Ethan to ask about Thanksgiving plans, and he was short with me in a way that felt practiced, like he'd been briefed. He said they were thinking of doing something smaller that year. Just the two of them. I said, of course, whatever works best, and I meant it. But there was something in his voice, a new distance, like he was reading from a card someone else had written. I filed it away. I didn't press. You don't press with adult children unless you want to push them further. Over the following months, it continued. Calls became shorter. Visits became more infrequent and, when they happened, Courtney was always present and always, in some way I struggled to name, steering. She had a talent for redirecting conversations. I would ask Ethan about a project at work and she would answer for him. I would reference something from his childhood, some shared memory between father and son, and she would find a way to make it about something else. After a while, I stopped trying to catch those moments and simply started watching her pattern. She wanted to erase the version of Ethan that existed before her. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's the accurate clinical description of what she was doing. And after 41 years of engineering, I am a man who values accuracy. By the time Ethan proposed to her, I had significant reservations. I did not share them. I understand the limits of a father's jurisdiction. I smiled at the engagement dinner. I shook her father's hand. I gave the toast that was expected of me. I said the things a good father says. I meant some of them. They married last spring. I sat in the front row. I wore the tie Ethan had given me for Father's Day the year before, because I thought he might notice, because I still believed in small gestures between fathers and sons. He didn't notice. After the wedding, the change accelerated. Phone calls dropped to once every 2 or 3 weeks, and were, when they happened, oddly formal. He would ask how I was doing in the same tone a bank representative uses when confirming your address. I began to sense that each call was being monitored. Sometimes I could hear Courtney in the background, not speaking, just present. The way someone sits in a room to make sure a conversation doesn't go somewhere they don't want it to go. Then, 2 months after the wedding, Ethan asked to meet for lunch. We met at a restaurant near his office in the city. A clean, modern place, the kind with no tablecloths and very good water and a menu that changes seasonally. I arrived before him and ordered coffee and watched the door. He came in wearing his work clothes, loosened at the collar, and he looked tired. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well in some time. I stood to hug him, and he gave me the kind of hug that technically qualifies as a hug. We ordered. We talked about nothing for 20 minutes. The kind of nothing that sits heavily on a table and is understood by both parties to be a placeholder for what's actually being discussed. Then he said it. He said that Courtney felt, and that he agreed, that the current arrangement with the properties was uneven, that having everything tied up in a will created uncertainty, that, given they were now married and thinking about their future, it would make more sense for the Connecticut house and the Vermont cabin to be transferred to him now, not after I died. Now, while I was alive and could oversee the transition properly, I put my fork down. I asked him to repeat what he had just said. He repeated it, more carefully this time. He used words like streamline and simplification and long-term planning. He said it was just about being practical. He said Courtney had consulted with a financial advisor who agreed it made sense. I looked at my son across that table, at his tired eyes and his careful language and his borrowed arguments, and I felt something leave me. Not anger, something quieter, the way a pressure system moves through before a storm. I told him I would think about it. He nodded, relieved that I hadn't said no outright. He didn't understand that when I say I will think about something, I am not offering hope. I am buying time to act. I drove home. I called my attorney from the driveway before I even went inside. I told her what Ethan had said. I told her I needed to understand my options. She asked me a number of questions. I answered them. Then I went inside and I sat in the kitchen, at the same table where I had walked Ethan through every document, every account number, every piece of a life his mother and I had built together, and I sat there until it was dark. I want to be honest about what I was feeling. I was not panicking. I have never been a man who panics. What I was feeling was something closer to grief with a hard edge on it. Grief at the recognition that the conversation I'd just had was not the first move in a process. It was a move far down the board. Whatever had been happening between Ethan and Courtney and the idea of me had been happening for a long time. This was just the day they decided to say it out loud. I told him I needed another few weeks. He accepted that. In those weeks, I did the following things quietly and without drama. I met with my attorney twice. I met with my accountant once. I updated several documents. I made 2 phone calls that I will not describe in detail, except to say that they were necessary and that I slept well both nights after making them. I also, and I want to be clear about why, bought a plane ticket. I had always wanted to see Lisbon. My wife had a photograph of it on her desk from a magazine she'd torn the page out of sometime in the early 90s. A hillside of white and yellow buildings above blue water. She'd said we would go someday. We never went. But I had thought about that photograph for 30 years, and now I booked a hotel for 10 days in October, and I paid for it in full, and I felt something shift in my chest when the confirmation email came through. It was my 68th birthday in September. Ethan called. He asked if I wanted to have dinner, just the 3 of us. I said yes. I chose the restaurant, a place I had been going to for years. A family-owned Italian place in my town where the owner knows my name and always brings bread before I ask for it. I wanted that dinner to be on ground I knew. They arrived on time. Courtney was wearing something that probably cost more than my first car. She hugged me in the way people hug when they want something from you. Ethan looked better than he had at lunch. Lighter, expectant. We ordered. We talked. The bread came. Then Courtney said, with the precise timing of someone who had rehearsed, that she and Ethan had been doing more thinking, that they really felt I should consider what a gift it would be to see them settled while I was still healthy, that watching them build their life in the Connecticut house would bring me so much joy. She smiled when she said it. I looked at my son. He looked at the table. I said, calmly, that I had also been doing some thinking, that I had, in fact, made some decisions. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and I placed a single document on the table between us. A letter from my attorney. I will not read you the legal language because you do not need the legal language. What it said, in simple terms, was that I had restructured my estate, that the Connecticut house and the Vermont cabin and the New Haven duplex were no longer in a will, that they had been placed into a trust with specific terms attached, that the terms required a 10-year period of annual review, that the beneficiary status could be modified or revoked at any point during that period based on criteria that I and my attorney had defined. I said, nothing is being given away while I'm alive, and nothing will be given away based on a timeline that benefits someone else's financial planning. Courtney's smile disappeared. Ethan looked up. What happened next happened fast. He said that this was a betrayal. He said I was punishing him for being responsible. He said that Courtney had been right, that I had always found ways to hold things over his head, that his whole life I had used money as control. I said, name one time. He couldn't. He said that wasn't the point. I said, then what is the point, Ethan? He stood up. He said that if I wasn't willing to treat him like a real partner in this family, then maybe I needed to think about what kind of relationship we actually had. He said I was being selfish. He said his mother would be disappointed in me. I want to tell you what that felt like. Not so you feel sorry for me, just so you understand the weight of it. He used his mother's memory as a weapon. He held her up between us like a shield, like a justification. He said her name in a restaurant where the owner knows my name and always brings bread. And he used her to try to make me fold. I did not fold. I said, your mother would want me to protect what we built. I am doing exactly that. He took the document off the table. He folded it once. He put it in his jacket pocket. He told Courtney they were leaving. She stood without looking at me. They walked out. I sat alone with the bread. The owner came over after a while. He asked if everything was all right. I told him yes, just some family business. He nodded in the way that men of a certain generation nod when they understand something they have no intention of naming out loud. He brought me a glass of wine without being asked. I sat with that glass for a long time. When I got home, there were 3 text messages from Ethan. The first was an apology of the variety that isn't actually an apology. The second reiterated his position. The third said that he and Courtney had decided it might be best if we had some space for a while. I read them once. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and I went to bed. In the morning, I called my attorney. I told her what had happened at dinner. I told her I wanted to proceed with the next step we had discussed. She confirmed that the paperwork was already in order. The rental duplex in New Haven, which Ethan had no legal claim to and which was mine entirely, was listed with a real estate agent that afternoon. It sold in 18 days. I donated 20% of the proceeds to a foundation that builds transitional housing for veterans. The remainder I deposited into an account that had Ethan's name removed from it 3 weeks prior. This is the part people sometimes ask about. They ask if I regret it. They ask if selling the duplex was about money or about making a point. The honest answer is both, and I don't think those things are in conflict. I had spent decades making responsible decisions on behalf of a family. I had honored my wife's memory by preserving what she and I built. I had offered my son transparency, documentation, trust. What I had been given in return was a dinner table confrontation where his mother's name was weaponized and a property transfer was demanded based on a timeline his wife had constructed. I sold the duplex because it was mine to sell, and because some lessons require consequences to become real. I did not contact Ethan for 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I received 2 voicemails from him, both of them shorter and quieter than the ones before. I received 1 email from Courtney, which I read and did not answer. I received a text from Ethan's college roommate, who I had always liked, saying he didn't know the details, but that he hoped things were okay between us. I flew to Lisbon on a Tuesday. I have been trying to think of how to describe what it felt like to arrive in a city where no one knows your name, and no one has an expectation of you, and no one is calculating what they might one day inherit from you. The honest description is clean. It felt clean. The way a workspace feels after you've cleared it of a project that is finished. I walked for most of the first day. Lisbon is a city of hills, and I am 68 years old with 2 good knees, and I walked until the light changed over the water, and the buildings up the hillside turned gold and then orange, and then the particular dark pink that a city gets when it has been built the right way, and the sun sets the right way, and you happen to be standing somewhere your wife once cut out of a magazine. I stood on a viewpoint above the Tagus River, and I thought about her. I thought about Ethan at 8 years old, sitting at the end of a dock at the Vermont cabin with a fishing line in the water and his whole future still entirely open. I thought about the height marks in the doorframe. I thought about the parking lot outside the hotel where his reception was held, and the way I cried there, and how that crying had been the cleanest, most uncomplicated thing I had felt in years. I thought about all the structures I had designed over 41 years, the ones meant to carry weight. I thought about how a good engineer builds not just for the expected load, but for the unexpected one, for the thing that exceeds the design parameters, for the moment the system is asked to hold something it was not intended to hold. I had been asked to hold something I was not intended to hold. I had declined. On the 4th day in Lisbon, I called Ethan, not because I was ready to resolve anything, because I wanted him to know I was alive and well, which is a different thing entirely. He answered on the 2nd ring. He sounded surprised. I told him I was calling from Portugal. There was a silence. He asked why I was in Portugal. I said, because your mother always wanted to see it and I think it's time. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, is it nice? I said, it's very nice. We talked for about 4 minutes. Nothing that will change anything. But 4 minutes on the phone with my son from a city above a river where the buildings turn gold at sunset, and nothing demanded, and nothing threatened, and no document on the table between us. Just a father and a son on the phone. I count that as something. I do not know what happens next with Ethan. I am a man who has spent his career understanding structural integrity, and I know that what was damaged is not easily repaired, and that repair, when it comes, must come from both sides, or it comes from neither. I am not waiting. I am not sitting by the phone mapping out reconciliation scenarios. I am living my life. The Connecticut house is still mine. The Vermont cabin is still mine, with the height measurements still penciled in the doorframe, going back to when he was 4. The trust is in place. The terms are clear, and I'm booked for 2 weeks in Porto in February, because the photographer at the hotel in Lisbon told me the light in Porto in winter is the best light in Europe, and I have not been a man who chooses to ignore good information when it's offered to him. My wife would have liked this version of me. I think about that sometimes. She was always telling me to stop carrying so many things at once. She said I moved through the house like a man waiting for something to fall. Nothing is falling. I had the bread and wine alone at the restaurant, and then I paid the bill, and then I drove home, and then I got my affairs in order, and then I bought a plane ticket to a city I had always wanted to see, and then I went. That is the whole story. There is no other version of it I would have chosen.